Hello world and true believers. This is Brenda, Lost Aspie Girl, and I wanted to make today's video about the paradoxical nature of being on the spectrum, the supposed paradoxical nature. It's also going to be partially kind of a follow-up on the whole extreme-minded theory of Simon Baron-Cohen on those of us on the spectrum. So you'll see what I mean as I get into it. Hopefully, if you bear with me. So a couple of things. First, I think a lot of times people think that people on the spectrum have very paradoxical natures, and the thing is that everybody has a paradoxical nature. It's just that I think that we're less capable of hiding it, and when we do hide it, we have a tendency to go from one extreme or the other. I'll use you like I tend to do. I'll use myself as an example. I'm very emotional. I'm not going to say that I'm not. And my emotions, but I'm also very logical. And I know that when I'm emotional, I can't see past my see past my emotions to logic, which is very frustrating to me. And it's why a lot of times, when I become emotional, I'll melt down, or I'll like when I was a kid, a lot of times when I realized, because a lot of times what will happen is in the midst of me being very emotional, there'll be some part of my brain which will recognize that I'm acting crazy, and I'll get frustrated with myself, but I won't know how to deal with it. So what I usually end up doing is I'll freak out for a second, and then some part of my brain will be like, you're acting crazy, and then I won't know what to do, and so then I'll run away and I'll hide. And the reason I would do this is because I couldn't see past my emotions, and I wanted to think logically, and it was very frustrating to me that I wasn't able to do that. And it still happens to me, I think. But though, and like a lot of the other people that are on the spectrum, you can let me know if this is true for you or not. But as you get older, you learn to suppress these emotions. You still don't know how to regulate the emotions. So I think what ends up happening, I think involuntary mutism takes two forms. I think that a lot of times if you have auditory processing problems like I do, if you're in a social situation, whether it be like running a meeting or just at some kind of function or whatever, and there are more than more than one people in the group talking at once, processing that information in real time is difficult, and our brains will kind of go into this we won't know what to say back. We'll have no words, and that will happen. The other time I think that also happens is that I think when we're younger, we're much more primal in nature, in the fact that if we're feeling an emotion, we just express it without much thought. We'll freak out, we'll melt down, we'll do whatever. And I think that those of us that are higher functioning, we realize as we get older that this causes us a lot of problems in our lives and our jobs, and with our families and various other things. And so we learn to suppress it, and it turns into anxiety and involuntary mutism. However, and this is another thing I want to ask a lot of other Spectrumites, is if, I know for me that in public or in social situations, whatever, I'm much better at holding my emotions in, because I have my guard is up and I'm wearing that camouflage. And so I'll do things like put my headphones on or start reading, which is still considered inappropriate, but at least I'm not freaking people out. Or I'll go and hide in the bathroom. I used to do this thing at work with my hands. I guess I didn't know it was self-stimming, where I would rub my hands together, and I think I mentioned it in another video, and people started teasing me about it. And if I started doing these things too much, a lot of times I would hide. But the other thing that I do a lot of times, if I start to freak out, is I'll put my headphones on, or I'll start reading, because I just want to block out the world. And almost like if I can't see what's going on, or if I can't hear it, then it doesn't affect me, and I don't have an emotional meltdown, which I know is still seen as inappropriate, but at least it's not freaking people out to the point where you could get fired or you get kicked out of the function or whatever. And this is going to lead into the whole gender thing, but for right now, I just wanted to talk about people on the spectrum. But the other thing that I want to say is, so in public, in social situations, you might do that, or at work or whatever, but I think your guard is very much up. when you're in these situations, or if you're younger, if you're in high school or college or whatever, your guard is up. You have that camouflage on. I think that, and if you think about this, and I just want to ask a lot of other Spectrumites that are out there, like when you're at home, when you're around your family, your guard is down because they're your family, but also your family are also the most triggering. Like they're the people that know the buttons to push with you the most, and so your guard is down with them, but you're also at your most vulnerable when you're with them. So I think that you're more likely to melt down or freak out when you're around your family than you are when you're older, than you are out in public or in social situations or anything like that. And like I know for a good example of this is last year. My brother was home, and I was talking to him, and I won't tell you guys the whole story. You don't need to know all of it. It's just that we ended up getting into an argument, and he said some things to me that were kind of hurtful, and I didn't know what to do, and I had the whole involuntary mutism thing, but he's also getting very aggressive and kind of in my face, and I was at we were at my parents' house, and I was staying there for a few days, so I just had on yoga pants and on and like a hoodie and no shoes, but I was in such a state of turmoil that I actually ran out of the house, and I ran away like I did when I was a kid. And the thing is that my parents a few years ago, they still live in Middleborough, but they moved into one of those 55 and older communities, and it's like a maze. And I wasn't paying attention, and I just took off, and I just ran and ran and ran. I had no shoes on, and I got lost. And I'm lost in this whole maze of things, and I'm walking around, I have no shoes on, and my feet are getting all cut up. And, after a few hours, my parents finally found me, and I didn't know what to say to them to make things better. And I think this also goes into a whole gender thing, like, and why girls a lot of times aren't. I think there are a lot more girls that are out there that actually are on the spectrum, and I think what ends up happening is they get diagnosed with something else, because I think in a lot of ways we appear more crazy than guys. At least that's the perception. So I and I'm going to get into that right now, because like I said, the paradoxical nature where like I'm very emotional, but I'm also logical, and I can't see like, and I'll even tell another story. But like I think when girls are younger, before they hit their period, I think we're much more like boys on the spectrum. And I think hormones come into play a lot in our diagnoses. And so like when I was a little girl, like I remember to this day, my sister always likes to tell everybody how I ruined Christmas, where I actually think I saved Christmas. And what happened was that when we were kids, my sister at like 3:00 in the morning, her and my brother would wake up, and they would come and they would get me. They would wake me up, and they would say, "Let's go wake up Dad and see if we can get our presents, because Santa Claus came." And I would say, "Go back to sleep. You know the rule. We're not supposed to get up until 6. If we go and try to wake up Dad right now, he's gonna get mad, and it's gonna ruin Christmas. Just go to bed. If you wake up, we'll just wake up in a few hours, and then Christmas will be here and it'll be fine." And then he'll flip out and call me the Grinch, and that I was a horrible sister and I was ruining Christmas. And this happened every year until I was about 14, when she kind of pretty much gave up. And she still talks about it to this day and says how I ruined Christmas. Now, I never went with her to wake my father up, because I just knew it was going to happen. He was gonna punish us. There was no way. I knew my dad, and I knew his rules. They were unbreakable. Like if he said, don't wake me up till 6, that he meant that. And my sister was constantly, she was always on what my dad liked to call PPP, permanent perpetual punishment, because she just loved. And this is something else. Someone wrote in a comment to me. I think it was Neighsayer or Martin Rogers. I think about. I just my thoughts just went out of my head. About the fact that that part of me wants to stop this video and start it all over again, but I don't feel like saying all this stuff again. About the fact that that we're not rebellious. That sometimes it seems that our actions seem like we're rebellious, but it's not. It's just that we hold true to who we are. We're not trying to do something because we're rebelling against something else. That's my sister. My sister always likes to say that she's like the black sheep of the family, but that isn't true at all. She, she gets invited to everything with all the other girls and everything like that. She's not seen as she doesn't make other people uncomfortable. If anything, she's very, very social. But she got in trouble a lot when we were kids, and that is because she was very, very rebellious. Like, if she couldn't be good at something, she had to be the worst at something. If she couldn't be the best at something, she had to be the worst, and she had to prove to the world that that was the case, you know? And so she was constantly getting in trouble, and I also knew this about my sister, and it confused me that she wanted to wake my father up at 3 o'clock in the morning, knowing his nature and knowing that it was just going to cause her to get punished, and then she was going to pull us into it. And I was like, no. She called me the Grinch and said I would ruin Christmas. And she still like every Christmas she'll bring it up, and I'm like, what are you talking about? I saved Christmas. Okay, so I'm digressing as per usual. So there's that. So like I aspire to logic. However, that doesn't always mean that I am logical. I know that there are times when I'm very emotional and I can't be logical. And this, first of all, I'm going to talk about neurosocials and how I think a lot of times that instead of saying things like I aspire to this, I want to be this, or this is my goal, like to be this way, they'll make claims like, and I mentioned this in another video, and it also bothers me all the time that people say that people in the spectrum hate liars, because I don't think that's true, because we know like the camouflage that we have to wear every day is a lie. What I think that we don't like is the fact that neurosocials lie to themselves and they don't even realize they're doing it. And I think that when we first notice that they're doing it, we get upset because we think that they know that they're doing it and they're trying to trick us. But then you after a while start realizing this is the story that they tell themselves and they believe it. And I have a couple of theories about this. Like a few years ago, I met this woman, and on this website, she had just gotten divorced, and we seemed to get along pretty well online, and she wanted to meet in person. And one of the things she kept telling me all the time, and it was weird because it just seemed out of nowhere and random, about how she was the most honest person, and she was honest to a fault, and all this kind of stuff. And the weird thing that would happen is she would do that, and then within the next like 5 minutes, she would make a rationalization or excuse for some behavior, which to me is a lie. And at first I was like, why does she keep saying that she's honest and then doing this? And then the first time I met her, I went over to her house with her, and her parents lived a few houses down, and she was meeting a man later that night for a date. And we stopped at Dunkin' Donuts, and she had 3 coffees, one for me, one for herself, and then one for this guy that she was going to meet. She wanted me to meet him. And we went to her parents' house, and her mom's like, why do you have 3 coffees? And she's like, oh, Brenda and I are going to a concert, and we're meeting a friend there, which is not true, and it just seemed like a weird random thing. Like I was very, so we get out of the house, and I'm like, why did you tell your mom that? And she's like, oh, like, blah, 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 blah. But I'm like, you said that you're honest. You don't. She's like, that's not the same. That's different, and blah, blah, blah. And I notice that neurosocials will do that all the time. They'll make a rationalization for a lie, and they'll say, I'm the most honest person. Then they'll lie or make a rationalization or an excuse, and then they'll make a rationalization for that. And for a really long time, this confused me. But now I realize what it is that it's the story that they tell themselves. Like, they don't like to be paradoxical. They don't want to contradict it. So if they tell themselves, like, I think, like, with her, what happened was she was married, and her husband cheated on her and lied to her all the time. She didn't like that. She doesn't want people to lie to her anymore. However, she realized she doesn't want to be a hypocrite, and she realizes probably that she lies herself. But I think that she thinks that if she tells people that she's the most honest person, then they'll believe that about her, but then they also won't lie to her. You know, and that's not how it works. Like, you can say, I aspire to be the truth. I want people to be honest with me. I know that I'm human, and that in this world, the only way to survive is to lie sometimes. But, you know, like, you know, and I know that sometimes, like, I need to do that, you know, to so that my parents don't think whatever about me, or that in life. But I don't like it when people tell me hurtful lies, because I know that there are different types of lies. And I think the difference with us, people that are on the spectrum, it's not that we don't like lying, because I think that we realize at a young age that in order to survive in this world, we need to wear certain camouflage. We need to edit ourselves, and we can't always tell the whole truth. If we did, then we will make people very uncomfortable. But we do this with our eyes open. We do this fully cognizant and aware of what it is that we're doing. And the fact is that, like, you know, we're not lying to ourselves. We know that isn't the truth. And that, I think, is the frustration that we experience with the neurosocial mindset, is that not only do they lie to other people, but they lie to themselves. And they're not even aware that they're doing that. And that's very frustrating. And you can't point it out to somebody because they get very, very upset. And then that's difficult to traverse in the world. So there's that. So I think that the thing is that we appear paradoxical, but it's actually a dialect. Because the thing is that I think, like, once again, this goes back to the whole cognitive dissonance thing. Like, two seemingly contradictory components can exist so oftentimes in synthesis or harmoniously, and actually not negate each other, you know? And I don't think that the neurosocial mind can accept this. So they're constantly telling themselves a story and trying to adhere to it so that things are consistent. The thing is that in life, things aren't always consistent. Sometimes there are patterns to things, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's consistent within the smaller circles of itself. Maybe a larger pattern within the larger pattern, but sometimes the smaller patterns will seem contradictory or paradoxical. But then as you move out and you start to see the bigger pattern, you start to see that they all actually move harmoniously and together. And that's something maybe we can get into a little bit more in another video, but I just kind of wanted to point that out. And another thing, like, part of the reason I think a lot of times girls that are on the spectrum don't get diagnosed a lot of times until later, or if it's not caught when they're younger, is because part of it is because it's much harder in this world as a female to survive without learning how to adapt in some way. And so and the thing is that instead of being like seen for guys for a lot of things that we're being antisocial a lot of times, I think that maybe we're timid. Because a lot of times the camouflage that we have to wear it emulates timidity, and I know that happened to my final job. What ended up happening is the camouflage I ended up wearing because people a lot of times when I would, like if I saw someone doing something wrong and I pointed out, they would tell me I was being aggressive, or a lot of times they thought I was doing all these things I wasn't doing. So what I started doing is I started not talking at all, and I seemed very, very timid, and people thought I was timid, and you guys can see right now I'm not timid at all, but there was such a fear of getting fired because of the fact that people didn't see my behavior as consistent. Like, I know a lot of people, like one of my bosses, he before he was my boss, the first time I met him, I was in a meeting, and he was saying a bunch of things, and I had read a lot of the testing, and the information that he got was from preliminary reports, and I had actually read the final results, and what he was saying was wrong. And it scared me because we're saying this in a meeting, and this is the information people are going to have. They're going to have, and I was like, that's wrong. And he didn't like that, and we got into a little bit of an argument. And then, and he didn't like me, and he was not very friendly to me at first. But then he became my boss, and he realized that all his preconceived notions about me were wrong. And I remember he took me aside one time, and he's like, I used to think you were like this. And I'm like, I understand why. He's like, why during a meeting would you point out that someone's wrong? Like, I'm like, well, you were wrong. And he's like, but you understand that I was going to get offended by that. I'm like, no, why? Like, you were wrong, and the people were going to think that what you said was right. I wanted to catch it. I didn't want them to go and utilize the information that you were saying when it could have caused additional problems. Like, I wasn't thinking about the fact that it was offensive to him. All I was thinking is, oh no, like, he's saying these things that are wrong. I just think, like, and I talked to a person here, Neighsayer, about ego, and that's another video I want to get into, because I think that the neurosocial ego is very invasive a lot of times, but it's also external. Their ego is based on status, on about appearing a certain way. Our ego, I think, is much more, he uses the word evasive, and I think that is due to the fact that it's much more internal. It's a smaller e. Our ego doesn't make up as much of our identity as other things, or our identity is based as much on our ego. It's much harder. We might hide it a lot of times, but I think it's much more tenacious, as in it doesn't get affected by people telling us we're wrong or we're doing something bad. We might hide into ourselves, but that doesn't necessarily. But the thing is, it's not as easily affected by popular opinion, consensus, or whatever, someone telling us we're wrong. In fact, we want to be right. So if someone points out that we're wrong, we'll go look into it and see if that's true. And if it is, I think that we're much more willing to admit the fact that we're wrong. It doesn't affect us in that way. Although we do sometimes, a lot of times, appear very rigid because we won't change our minds. Like I wrote another comment to Jordy John about, he was talking about how he doesn't have a lot of friends at work and everything like that, and I was talking about how, like, a lot of times, every once in a while, I want to go to like a function for a meetup.com group, and usually it's because it's based on like like things that I like something nerdy like Game of Thrones or Star Trek or something like that. And there'll be some kind of event, like they had, like there was a Star Trek convention a couple of years ago in Boston, and I went to it. And the thing that always frustrates me when they have these things is I want to talk about, we're there for a very specific purpose. We're there to talk about this topic, and everybody wants to talk about everything else. And every time they go off that topic, I'll bring it back, and they'll get frustrated with me, and I'll be frustrated with them. But of course, they're the dominant mode of thinking, so like I'm the one who kind of gets pushed out of the conversation. But it confuses me that we're there to discuss things like whatever it is that we're discussing, and then they want to chit chat and talk about like the weather or like the weird things about their personal lives or whatever. And that's very confusing to me because, to me, we're there for a specific purpose. And so like I'll go one or two times, and sometimes I don't go back because I feel so uncomfortable. I make everybody else uncomfortable. So there's that. So the ego, and I'm digressing a little bit. Okay, but going back to the whole hormone thing and the gender thing. So one of the things is it's much more integral for a girl to socialize to survive, because I think that what ends up happening, instead of being looked at as being on the spectrum or whatever, if we get something wrong, we're more harshly penalized. We're told that we're crazy or whatever. And I think also the way it manifests itself, it appears more crazy, okay? Because I think that a lot of times girls are more emotional. And so, although it's not emotional for the same reason other girls are, like I was talking before, like I don't feel connected to people most of the time, but when I do feel like my family, I feel very connected to. But like it's like usually like I like romantic love, I don't believe in that at all. I've always thought it was bullshit, and I don't understand it. And like I mentioned in the other video that like it seems to me that the people that you love the most are the people that you least want to have sex with, and that's always confusing to me how girls like want this whole romantic love thing to me, because love seems like almost like it's the destroyer of passion and sex and like that hunger. But that I'll get into, and I don't want to weird people out into maybe in another video. So there's that when we're younger, and also the thing is that a lot of girls on the spectrum are hypersexual, and the thing is that will also get us in trouble and get us diagnosed with various other things, because girls are not supposed to be, like, I don't see myself as a sexual being, but I see myself as having hunger sometimes, and if I want to fulfill those hungers, it is a crazy double standard for that. And so you learn at a younger age that you can't talk about it, and you have to find different ways of getting your hungers met without getting in trouble. And that's difficult. But okay, and going back to the whole hormone thing, is that I know, like, for me, like, up until I hit puberty, I was very much a tomboy. And then I hit puberty, and there's something about, I liked looking feminine, and also that was a good way to get certain hungers met. But on top of that, I think that as a girl, what I started noticing, like, I track and trend my period cycles. I don't think most girls do this unless they're trying to get pregnant. I do this not because I give a shit when my period actually is coming or anything. Well, I do because I don't, but also for my moods. Because what I noticed a long time ago, even before they had period trackers come out, is that my moods correlated with my cycle. Like a guy's hormones are more like, if we're going to use a metaphor, are more like a river, and that they're direct and that they're flowing and that they're pretty constant. And every once in a while there'll be a surge, like testosterone of anger or a drought or whatever. But for the most part, they're pretty direct. Girls' hormones aren't like that. They're pretty erratic, but they seem erratic if you just look at them. If you don't look at the pattern, there's usually a pattern there, and if you understand what the pattern is, you actually can override a lot of the hormonal fluctuations. Because I noticed that, like, the 2 weeks after my period, external forces don't bother me that much, but the 2 weeks before my period, starting almost the day, 14 days to the day, before my period, like the day before, someone could say something to me and I won't have emotional reaction at all. The day starting like those 14 days to the day before my period, if someone says something to me, it might affect me much more so. But knowing this about myself, when that happens, I can kind of step back from that emotion and be like, I'm only being emotional right now because it's hormonal. It's not real. And understanding that allows me to kind of to look at things more logically, or realize I need to step away from the situation and come to grips with something. Because sometimes even when I understand something is hormonal or that my emotions are a little bit erratic, it's hard for me to see past it. So I have to remove myself from the situation and take a step back. And I think because girls have these more erratic emotions, we're more sensitive a lot of times to certain things and everything like that, we can appear less logical. And even when we're being logical, I think a lot of times, especially the neurosocial brain, they filter things. So they don't always hear the words that you're using. They'll hear tone of voice, various other things. And even if you're being extremely logical, if you appear emotional, it doesn't matter. Those filters are there, and they're not actually going to hear your words. This is a part of the reason also why, even when I'm not cluttering and I'm able to express myself clearly, I know I'm very animated, and there are a lot of times a lot of emotion in my voice, and that people want to hear what I'm saying. I also realize, like, a lot of times when I step into a room, I'll actually see if the men that are in there don't know me, even sometimes a woman, they'll look at me and they'll be like, she's a girl, blah, blah, blah. And I can see them dismissing me already before I've even said anything. And that is a battle that every girl, whether neurosocial or on the spectrum, has to fight. I just think the girls that are on the spectrum are much more cognizant of things like that. And we're less likely to use our femininity to get forward, and that makes it even more of a struggle because we don't know how to manipulate. And I don't think even if we did, we would try to do that. We kind of want to be left alone. We're not good at advocacy, which is another video I want to make. And part of the reason why I actually went on my own journey to cure myself of fibrous breast disease and the systemic candida, because the medical community wasn't doing much about it, or the tactics they were using weren't very helpful. And there's actually some other things I want to talk about, because I actually had a spinal fusion a few years ago due to I have scoliosis, and how that and that little bit of a journey, because that's actually kind of interesting. And I think it'll help to give some perspective on self-advocacy and how we're not good at it. Because I think sometimes we have very high tolerance to pain, so we have very low tolerance. It's actually, I think in most things, when people that are on the spectrum, it's always either or. There's not much. It's we can seek balance, but I think, like, when it comes to socially, how we appear to the rest of the world, it seems that we're one extreme or the other. We're either very emotional or too logical, or whatever it is. Like, I think even when we're connecting to people, sometimes people will confuse our intensity, and it will scare them away, because if we're going to connect with somebody, like, we don't take shortcuts, so we're just going to be ourselves 100%, and that sometimes will scare people, and they'll make assumptions about what that means, even though maybe we're just excited about something, or it'll go the other way. Like, I know this will happen to me with people, where people they either get obsessed with me or whatever, they hate me. There's not much of an in between. But I also realize that is partially due to me and how I present myself. I'm not good at modifying that according to the other person. I also realize that I think that those of us on the spectrum, we're oftentimes a real life litmus test for other people's unresolved and unacknowledged bullshit. Like, if they can't read us, then whatever's crazy is going on for themselves that they haven't even dealt with or acknowledged, because I think people, neurosocials, have much more difficult time looking in that proverbial mirror. A lot of times they'll project that onto us, because I know that, like, sometimes I'll be talking to somebody who's neurosocial, and they'll be a very angry person, and they'll start assuming, like, they'll say to me, like, stop being so angry, and I'm like, I'm not angry. Or, like, if I'm hanging out with somebody who's very insecure, or talking to someone who's very insecure, they'll start saying, like, oh, it's blah 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 because you're insecure. I'm like, where's that coming from? And like, a long time ago, I used to, like, take this and I would try to look at myself and try to figure out what it was about me that they were seeing. And then all of a sudden, like, a few years ago, I started realizing it wasn't me at all, that they were projecting. Because, like, how could it, there's one person I'm talking to here, and, like, is saying that I'm angry, but then 5 minutes later I'm talking to this person over here and they're saying I'm too happy. Like, how, like, I didn't change that much in 5 minutes, you know what I mean? And it wouldn't be just happen one time. I would see this happening repeatedly. Like, if I went to an event repeatedly and these two people there, this person was repeatedly telling me I was too happy, and this other person is repeatedly telling me I'm too angry, and I'm like, You know, like, I don't think that that can both be happening simultaneously at the same time in the same events over and over again, unless they're seeing things in me that aren't not necessarily there, or they're amplifying something that's in me, and maybe they're even projecting something that's about themselves that they haven't dealt with. And I think that's very interesting, you know. And I think a lot of times, especially girls on the spectrum, we have a tendency to internalize things. So when people tell us these things, we'll keep looking at ourselves and trying to look, and we'll become much more self-critical. I think guys do this too. They're not as verbal about it, and they're not. I don't think they obsess about it as much as we do. But I think that we do from a younger age. We start told all the time how what we're doing is wrong and bad and everything like that. And I think that, like, again, like, that's why I made that video about sense of self. I think that a lot of times female on the spectrums don't have a very strong sense of self, because they're told over and over again throughout their life that everything that they're doing is wrong or bad, and they, you know, and we're not socially influenced. So what I think what ends up happening is they put on this camouflage against the rest of the world. They have less and less of a voice, and and even though when they're by themselves, I think they have a strong sense of themselves, that sense of self doesn't translate to the rest of the world. And I think and they get and whatever it is that they think of themselves gets lost in translation, and I think that's difficult. So sorry, this is so long. You know, I've been making really long videos lately, but I hope that it helps to give some perspective. And again, if you guys have any feedback or anything like that, let me know. Okay, bye.